So this is going to be a lot of work on you and very little work for me because you will be doing most of the talking. But with that said, let us slowly get started. All right. So if you've attended any of my sessions before, I always start things by saying I don't have or want to complete everything that I've planned for. So all I want is that whatever I talk about should be entirely clear to you, right? So at any point, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat or like raise your hand or something, and we can talk about it. All right, awesome. So I'm going to talk about something called the mystery of why. All right, okay, is my voice breaking or is it all right? It is breaking.
Sir, it is breaking a little.
Let me do this. Okay, sorry about that. Is this fine now? Is it any better now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, perfect. Okay, awesome. So that sounds good. Thanks for letting me know early on that it's breaking. But yeah, I guess the main point of what I was saying is that if you have any questions, just stop me then and there. Either put your answers in a chat or raise your hands and we can definitely talk about it. All right. Awesome. So that is good. So let's slowly get started. So I've titled my talk to be the mystery of why. All right. So let's slowly get started. I will start with what I think is a super interesting example. All right. So I have a plot. On the x-axis, I have the months of the year, Jan, Feb, March, and so on. And this plot tells me about the number of deaths that have occurred by drowning in Spain. Okay, so the reddish plot here is telling me the number of deaths in Spain. So in some sense, it's very low in February and very high in May or June, right? And it's very low in like November, December again. And the blue line here is telling me how many ice creams I've consumed in kilograms, right? You look at the axis on the right, it's telling me that in February, for instance, the country of Spain has consumed approximately 8 million kilograms of ice cream. That's a lot of ice cream, but that's a lot of people also, right? But you see there is something very similar between these two graphs, right? So the number of deaths by drowning appears to follow a very similar situation as to the kilograms of ice cream consumed, right? So, I mean, if I look at this graph, the very first question that I can ask is, does ice cream cause drowning? So I want you to put in the chat what you think the answer to this question is. Do you think ice cream causes drowning? In particular, I want to ask, if we banned ice cream, do you think a fewer people are going to drown? Okay, more than saying a yes or a no, I also want you to give me one short explanation for why your answer is a no or why your answer is a yes.
Okay, so you can put your explanation in the chat or you could raise your hands. Okay, fine. Ananya, can you please answer?
Yes, no, ice cream does not cause drowning because both increase in summer. That means more like people go for swimming and they also eat ice cream in summer. So it's
Excellent.
more like a cause and effect relationship.
Wonderful answer, right? The whole point is this. So think about it. There is some common cause that's underlying both of these things. One is the main common cause is that the temperature is very high in the summer. So I would want to go swimming. I can't swim, but people would want to go swimming. And that is what is causing the number of deaths by drowning to increase. But on the other hand, because the temperature is very hot, we all love a cup of ice cream. And again, that is what is increasing your ice cream consumption, right? So like I said, temperature is like the main common cause for both of these together, right? So one of the main things that I want to address is distinguish between two quantities called correlation and causation. So the idea behind correlation is that two things trend together. If one of them increases, the other also increases. If one decreases, the other also decreases, right? So here, as we see in this example, the number of deaths by drowning increases if the ice cream consumption increases. The number of deaths by drowning decreases if the ice cream consumption decreases. right? So in some sense, these two are very highly correlated, but it does not make sense to say that one of them has caused the other, right? I could also ask the question in the other way around. Do you think so? What I initially asked was, does ice cream consumption cause drowning deaths? Now, I can also ask a stupider question, which is, do you think drowning deaths cause an ice cream consumption? Which is even more weird to think about, right? So the main point that I want to bring across is that correlation does not imply causation. Just because two things trend upwards or downwards together does not necessarily mean that one thing has caused the other, right? So let's put this example to one more test and we can come up with some more examples, right? So Maine is a state in the US. It's in the northeast of the US. And people have observed the following. So this is over the course of 10 years, from 2000 to 2010, people have observed something very, very interesting. On the blue axis, the blue line refers to the number of divorces per 1,000 people, right? So in 2000, the number of divorces were very, very high. In 2001, it slightly reduced. In 2005, it came to a slight
What is
minimum.
divorces?
Oh, divorces is when people are married, but then they no longer want to be married and so part ways and separate from each other. Okay, thank you for the question, right? So if you look at the number of divorces in Maine, it seemed to have hit a minimum in 2005 and then it appears to be increasing again, right? So now put this thought on a hold and let's look at something very, very different. Let's look at margarine consumption. Margarine is an alternative for butter, right? So if I look at the number of pounds of margarine consumed per capita, in other words, how many half kilograms of butter is each person eating, that appears to follow a very similar trend, right? In 2000, then people were eating a lot of butter and it appears to have come down, down, down all the way until 2005. And then it's gone up, increasing back again. And then there appears to be a small decreasing trend again, right? So again, these two graphs again are extremely similar, right? So similar to how we asked questions the last time, I can ask about, do you think people eating butter is causing divorces? Or similarly, do you think divorces are causing people to eat a lot of butter, right? In this case, do you think any of these causations make sense? And again, put your answers out in the chat. Yes, put your answers out and maybe like one of you can unmute and like
Sir,
explain why neither of these make sense. Yes.
sir, I
Yes.
have a small hypothesis.
Yeah.
So margarine, it's like a really cheap butter used in the US. So
Sure.
probably margarine consumption, probably they became really poor and then
Mhm.
they bought margarine to eat because they couldn't afford it. And then they
Okay.
couldn't afford their families either, so they just divorced.
Wonderful. Okay. That's a very, very, yeah, that's a very interesting causal
Can I say
mechanism, I
something?
would say. Sure.
Probably they couldn't afford it.
Wonderful. I really like these answers, right? So now what are
Look
we
at
thinking of?
uh,
Mhm.
just wait.
Oh,
Can I
sure, sure. Complete your answer, please. Yeah.
um it can happen like the uh, female or the wife can make the bread butter with the bad quality of butter and then husband decides to take divorce.
Wonderful. Okay. I really like that idea, right? So, okay. So one very interesting thing has come
Sir,
out. Thanks all of you to your answers, right? So one very interesting thing has come out, right? What are we doing now? We've observed some data and we're trying to understand whether one thing has caused the other or not. In other words, just because we see some correlation, what we are now trying to do is we're trying to understand if there is any way to explain why two things are behaving very similarly, right? So this is sort of the main point of what I want to talk about, and this is sort of the main goal of one of the major arms of statistics called causal inference. right? So I'm going to talk about causal inference in general very soon, but I really like the direction that you all are going in, right? So just because we observe correlation gives us reason to believe that there is something else going on underneath. And what the study of causal inference attempts to do is to try and uncover this goal. Is this goal a real thing? Is there a real link between the two things that I'm studying? If so, what is the link between the two things that I'm studying? And how much is the link between the two things that I'm studying? That's the whole idea of what is called causal inference, right? So let's come back to one more example now. Okay, this is a slightly weird plot. The time is decreasing from right to left. Okay, so there's a weird way to, but I really like this plot for very specific reasons. So on the y-axis, I have the average temperature, the global average temperature. Okay, so it starts with 13 degrees Celsius in 18. So it starts with around 14 degrees Celsius in the year 1820. And the average temperature of the world has gone up, up, and up, all the way to almost 16 degrees Celsius in 2000, in the year 2000, right? Now, I'm also looking on the other hand at the number of pirates in the seas that are operating. All right. So this is again a slightly weird plot, but I like it plotted this way. Right. So in the year 1820, there were close to like 35,000 pirates. There are a lot of pirates in the world. Right. And I'm sure you must have seen a lot of movies. And right. So I think this should be like 30,000, not 45,000. But yeah, apologies about that. So, and in 1860, it became close to 30,000, and then 20,000, 15,000, 5,000. And in the year 2000, there are very small number of pirates, right? So in other words, what seems to happen is that if my global average temperature increases, then the number of pirates also appears to decrease. And conversely, if the number of pirates decreases, my global average temperature appears to increase, right? So now this begs a question, right? Do you think having more pirates is helping me reduce global warming? That's a very stupid question I can ask from here, right? See,
Sir, may I
Mhm.
answer?
Sure, please, yeah.
answer something?
Okay, one of you, please. Yeah, one of you at a time. Yeah,
Okay,
I'll take in multiple answers, but yeah, one of you at a time.
Athar.
They are actually not related.
Okay. Why do you think so?
So actually, if there are more pirates, then the ships will release more carbon dioxide and thus
Okay.
increasing global warming.
Sir,
Interesting.
they
Okay, that
used
is
wooden ships. It wasn't powered by coal.
wonderful. I really like that answer. So one
But
of you said
not in
that,
2000. Why would they use those types of ships in 2000?
sure, I really like these answers, right?
No, sir,
So what
but
you
I
think?
think the reason is because global warming happened because of the Industrial Revolution. And
Okay,
pirates
and
found it much harder to do piracy in the Industrial Revolution. But
why do
I
you
don't
think
think that
pirates found it
means
more difficult? Let me ask you this.
because there were more security measures and all those sorts of things.
Excellent,
And now
right?
there were guns and pistols and those military helicopters and all.
Excellent, right? I really like this answer. In some sense, yes. I'll take one more answer and then we can slowly
Sir,
press on. Okay, so firstly, there are
Sir,
going to be a
can
lot of
I
questions I'm going to ask you. Okay,
sir,
yes,
can I
one of you,
send my
please.
answer in the chat?
Oh,
Yeah,
sure, sure,
you
sure.
can,
Definitely.
Shrestha, please.
Yes, please.
Sir, can I
Sir,
answer?
the number of
Yeah.
it's a
Mhm.
coincidence because the number of pirates are decreasing because of modern technology, and the
Mhm.
average global temperature is increasing because of air pollution, sir.
Excellent. I really like these answers, right? Okay, so one thing I should say right off the bat is that I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. So if you didn't get to answer one question here, don't worry. Hold your thought. I'm going to have a lot of questions for you. Okay, but yeah, thank you so much for the answers. Right? In other words, what I claim is the following. This situation is just a very complicated version of this situation that I had here. In this case, there was only one cause that I identified, which is simply temperature. Temperature is causing more swimming and that is causing more drowning deaths. and temperature is causing more ice cream consumption. There was a very simple way to explain this, right? But in this case, there is a very, very complex thing going on, as many of you pointed out, right? The main factor here is time, right? In other words, as time has passed, there has been a lot of industrialization, etc., which is causing my global average temperature to go up, right? So just because there are a lot of industries, there are a lot of machines coming up, my temperature is going up. And similarly, like one of you pointed out, with increase in time, there are better security measures, there are better detection mechanisms, etc., which is making the life of pirates really, really very difficult, right? So in other words, there are multiple reasons, there are many reasons that are operating in this case, which is giving me this interesting correlation where the temperature appears to increase if the number of pirates decreases, right? So I cannot have this stupid solution to global warming by simply training more pirates, right? The world is going to run into a lot more issues if I train more pirates in an attempt to reduce global warming, right? Now, put yourself in the shoes of maybe like the president or maybe like a chief officer in the United Nations or something like that, right? So let's say you're tasked to come up with a solution to combat or to reduce global warming, right? Your solution is obviously not going to be to reduce or to increase the number of pirates, right? You're going to run into trouble if that's your solution, right? So the idea behind causal inference is to correctly understand what is causing what, and more importantly, two other questions that arise out of it. One, um, is it really causing that? And two, how much is the causation's effect? In other words, in this example, for instance, how much is temperature causing my ice cream sales to go up? Are there any other factors that affect my ice cream sales to go up, right? For example, it could just be the case that May, June, and July, all of them are on their summer holidays, and so people just have more time to buy ice cream, right? So there are multiple reasons that could simply cause an ice cream sale to go up in May, June, and July. But what we are interested in understanding is how much was the effect of temperature in the ice cream sales going up, right? So this is broadly what the idea of causal inference is, right? So now I'm going to put all of you to a test, right? So I'm going to give you a lot of examples, and maybe one or two people per question can raise their hands. Maybe like you can lower all hands now, and I can take in answers from maybe like one or two people per example, right? So the first question for you all is the following. So it's been observed that children with larger feet tend to read better. In other words, if children have large feet, size 7 or 8 shoes, they read better than children with very small feet. One of you maybe okay, the organizers maybe like help me unmute one person and maybe take in an answer, preferably somebody who's not answered before. But
Okay, Amsh.
Yeah, if they have bigger feet means they can stand for longer, and if they don't have enough furniture in their house, they can stand and read for longer.
very, very interesting way to explain this. Very interesting. Hold your thoughts. Shall come back to you on this. Does somebody have another explanation to why they think this is correct?
So it might be because children with larger feet are kind of teased at school and they want to get good marks on studies and then they read more.
Interesting. Okay, I was not expecting this answer. Okay, I hope
Sir,
you've not been teased, but yeah.
sir,
Larger feet are considered as a bit of adults before 18 years, and children with smaller feet are considered as smaller children. So they don't know to read well.
Interesting. Okay, so let me maybe like, okay, so let me divert your answer to like one specific.
sir, I have one explanation.
Okay,
Wait,
what's your answer?
excuse me, sir. Can I say something?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so all of you who are interrupting and trying to very eagerly put your answers forth, please stop doing so. I'm sure sir said he has a lot of questions, so we should take this in an ordered way, all right?
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. But I really like these answers. They can browse through libraries without getting tired. That's a very good answer.
Yes.
All right. Okay, let me just point your attention to one specific thing. So let's just restrict our attention to children in the age group of maybe 1 to 6 or something like that. Okay? Very, very young kids. I don't know if they can read at that age, but very young kids. I'm looking for one very simple answer. I have a very simple answer in mind. Do you want to put out your answers in the chat? Put out some more answers in the chat. Interesting. They can reach books on the top shelf. That is very interesting. I don't think that's to do with large feet, though. Larger legs, sure. Wonderful. I really like Atharv's answer. So, Atharv, can you quickly unmute Atharv Shukla and explain your answer to us?
So if children that are older have bigger feet, of course, because they're older,
Sure.
and they must be academically better because they've attended more classes than children younger than them, and thus
Wonderful.
they
I
can
really
read
like that.
better because they have more experience.
Wonderful. I really like that answer, right? One common cause for both larger feet and the ability to read better is simply the fact that they're older, right? A 1 year old has very small feet, and I'm not expecting a 1 year old to read. I don't know when people start reading, but I'm not expecting a 1 year old to read, right? And maybe like a 5 or 6 year old hopefully has larger feet and also reads better, right? So one common example is age, right? So now maybe let me ask you to lower all hands again, and then let's do one more example, right? So it has also been observed that if I have a lot of firefighters fighting a fire, the damage appears to be more, right? So, I mean, if I just look at this statement, my first thought is that, oh, are the firefighters causing the damage, right? So, I want somebody to come up with an explanation for what they think an alternative mechanism could be. Okay, so maybe again, you can help me unmute somebody, volunteer.
Meenakshi.
We need more firefighters to handle a larger fire. A smaller group will
Excellent.
not be much effective.
Excellent, right? I really like that answer. If there is a larger fire, I need more firefighters, and if there's a larger fire, that I need more damage, then that means there's more damage, right? In other words, just concluding that firefighters cause damage is not something that is very nice to do, right? So let's do one more example now. Again, let's lower all hands. I have more questions. I have a lot of questions for you, okay? So this is something slightly interesting. I want to see, I'm very curious what your answers are.
Can I
It has
say?
been observed that if I have a lot of doctors in a particular area, then the chocolate consumption in that area is also very, very high. In
Sir,
other
can I
words,
say? Sir, can I say? Sir, can I say?
on a
Please, please
Please,
share his answer.
Ishan, please do not interrupt like this.
I love your enthusiasm, though, so please don't let this extinguish your enthusiasm while we're talking about firefighters. But yeah,
All right, Ishan.
Sir, because when doctors put injection, small children will cry, sir. They need chocolate more.
interesting. Okay, that is a very interesting thought. Does anybody have some more answers?
Agnika. Sri.
Yes, sir. Sir, I see that when doctors give prescriptions to go and get medicines, in the
Mhm.
pharmacies they also sell chocolates, so the kid may also want that.
Wonderful. I really like that answer. Very,
Yes.
very nice
Sir,
answer.
I
Yeah,
have another
one.
answer.
Sure.
Sir, people who eat lots of chocolates tend to get more cavities. And in areas which have more cavities, there will be more doctors to heal those cavities. And that is why
Okay.
there are more doctors where there are more cavities. And where
Okay.
there are more cavities, there are more chocolate.
Interesting. That is a very good explanation. Okay.
I have a
One more answer, and then we can slowly press things on, and then we can come back to some more questions. Okay. One more.
Dark chocolate is good for health.
Chocolate is good for health, and so doctors are prescribing chocolate. Is that what you're
Sir,
saying?
if doctors eat more chocolates, there is more sugar in chocolates which gives more energy so they can speak to patients. More
Very wonderful.
patients.
That's a very nice explanation. Okay. Awesome.
people will think that doctors are really near to them when they're having chocolate, so they'll have as much chocolate as they want and they'll go to doctors.
Okay, wonderful. I hope you've not been doing that with your doctors,
So,
but
because of long hours of work, doctors might need to eat chocolate to get more energy.
okay, interesting. Awesome. That sounds good. Thank you so much for your answers. You have a lot of answers, right? So I'll maybe like ask you
Sir,
to like
sir, if we
okay,
eat
I'll take some more responses, but maybe like in a little bit of time, right? You all have amazing answers now. I love the enthusiasm, but let's slowly press on so that we get to some more interesting stuff other than doctors and chocolates, right? I like chocolates, but not doctors. Yeah, let's get to something slightly more interesting, right? So the point here is the following. So one of the explanations that I came up with, for example, is simply the fact that just because wealth, an area is slightly more, if it's wealthy, then I would expect there to be a lot of doctors. And if an area is like slightly wealthy, I would expect a higher chocolate consumption simply because there is, right? So all of your answers seems to prompt one particular thing, right? So there are multiple ways to explain why one thing has caused the other, right? But we want to be sure of whether which of these explanations are correct, right? So that is what the main goal of causal inference is, right? But I hope that some of you are wondering, how is all of this even useful? What am I going to achieve by studying doctors and chocolate consumption and whatever? This seems to be like something interesting but not very useful to study, right? So what I'm going to slowly draw your attention to is what the actual uses of causal inference are, and we're going to slowly press on that a little bit further, right? So just one small term. So let's remember, what am I trying to do? I have what I think is a cause and I have what I think is an effect, right? So in the case of maybe the firefighters example, I think that if I have more firefighters, then the damage is more. So the firefighters is the cause and the damage is the effect, right? But let's say I want to understand the effect of more firefighters on the damage, right? So there is one variable or one major variable that is affecting both of them, right? So if I have a very large fire, then there is going to be more firefighters and there's also going to be more damage, right? So this idea of there being a third external common link that influences both my cause and my effect, that is called a confounder, right? And this effect or this mechanism is called confounding. So what we've been mostly discussing so far is something called the idea of confounding, where we're trying to identify third or external factors that try to impact both my cause and my effect, right? In other words, what I'm trying to do is, if I really want to understand the effect of the cause on the effect, in other words, if I'm really trying to understand the effect of firefighters on damage, or if I'm trying to understand the effect of butter consumption on divorces, what I would really need to do is to control for the factors that can affect both, right? So I'll tell you what I mean by control in a very short time, all right? So let's push slowly towards what causal inference is. So one of the, yeah, is there some question? I'll just take one quick question and then we can continue if there's one question. Yeah.
Sir, can you please go to the before slide?
Oh, sure. Yes. There you are.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll send you the slides on the chat. So you need not note a lot of things, but I can send you some links in the chat. All right. Awesome. So let's press on the idea of what the actual use of causal inference is. I mean, if I'm trying to study if I'm trying to study so much math or so much statistics just to understand butter consumption and divorce, I should really be questioning myself what I'm doing, right? So what we should really understand is, like, we have to come up with ways to understand or answer very, very useful questions, right? So one of the nice things about causal inference is that it's extremely relevant today in the context of a lot of things, right? So one very specific example that I'm going to draw your attention towards is in understanding the effectiveness of a drug, right? By a drug, I mean a medicine. Okay, the commonly used terminology is a drug, and that's what I'm going to stick with. All right. So the idea is this. So let's say all of you have like a major form, you're the CEO of a pharmaceutical company, right? So you've okay, so I'm guessing that was nice, but right. So let's say all of you have a major pharmaceutical company. You're the CEO of a pharmaceutical company, right? And let's say you've come up with a magic cure for, let's say, fever, right? Usually it takes maybe, let's say, 3-4 days for the fever to completely go down if you get a fever, right? And let's say you've come up with a drug or a medicine that reduces maybe fever in, let's say, 1 day or something, right? So, and you're very, very happy, you're very proud of your team of scientists who have come up with this. But I'm an external guy, right? And I'm asking you, does it really work, right? So, in some sense, you have to find a way to convince me that your drug works, right? Take a minute to think about this. I want you to explain. Okay, put your answers in the chat. Okay, I'm expecting a lot of answers for this. Put your answers in the chat. I want you to explain how you're going to convince me that this drug works. Is the question clear? Right? You're the CEO of a company, you're presenting it to me, right? I want you to explain to me, I want you to convince me that this drug actually works. Why are you selling this drug? So put your answers out in the chat and I'll probably call upon one or two more people.
Guys, just two things. Okay. One, don't send your answer in more than once. And two, when you're going to give an answer, give a reason. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Sir, could you go back to the last slide?
Oh,
Sir, could
no.
you please
Okay.
repeat the question?
Okay, I can repeat the question. Yes. So the last slide, don't worry about the last slide. We're talking about something slightly different now. Okay. All of you are the CEOs of a pharmaceutical company, right? You're making medicines. Okay. In 20 years from now, hopefully you are making medicines now, right? Now, let's say I am, I don't know, like the president of the country, let's say, because why not, right? And you come up with a drug or you come up with a medicine that you claim reduces fever in 1 day, right? Other examples are the other existing medicines work in maybe like 4 days or 5 days. They take a lot of time to reduce my fever, right? Now, I'm asking you, why do you think your medicine works, right? I want you to come up with a way to explain to me that the drug works. How are you going to convince me that this drug actually works? Is the question clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Awesome. So, in your chat, put down how you're going to convince me. I'm not asking you to convince me, but I'm asking you to think about how you're going to convince me. Oh no. Adrit, I really like your thought. Make him get fever and test the drug on him, but please don't do that. That is very, very unethical. Okay. Get the fever and test it on myself. Oh man, why would you want to do that to yourself?
Sir, I have an answer. Can I tell?
Sure, I'll just wait for maybe one or two more responses to give some more time to think and then I'll come back to you. Is that fine? I just want some more
I
people
told
to
the
think
answer in
about
the chat.
it. Okay, sure. Awesome. That sounds good. What's your name again? Sorry?
Saranya.
Saranya. Okay, awesome. Thank you. I will read your answer and ask you to explain your answer also. Oh no, you test the medicine on a body of a dead person. Okay. Maybe it's a
Srivatsan,
wonderful answer.
do you have something to say?
No, I am asking if I can say what I'm gonna convince.
Okay. What's your question again? Sorry.
No, I'm gonna say about what I'm gonna convince you.
He
Okay,
wants
sure.
to give
Okay,
an
go on.
answer.
How are you going to convince me? Convince me.
Um, I'll I'll do the exact opposite of what drug I have done. Like if I think the drug can reduce the fever, then I should also have an antidote that will give fever, because if in any case my prediction becomes wrong, I always have a antidote in my hand and I can test it on a victim.
Okay, victim. Don't say it's not a victim, but a patient.
Okay.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, I like your answer. I like your thought. Okay, one
Sir,
interesting answer.
wouldn't the
Can I
antidote,
ask
will the
Nishka to
antidote be the
unmute?
drug that you are holding?
Yes, the antidote is the drug. Yes. But can I ask Nishka to unmute, the one who said your medicines are absolutely safe? And we've
Yes,
tested
sir.
this with many experiments. Yes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
How I'm slightly intrigued by your statement. You're saying that your medicines are safe, right? To come to the conclusion that your medicines are safe, you need to do some test. So we're thinking about what are the tests that we're doing. So why are you convinced that medicines are safe? Let's ask you for that. I can't hear you clearly. Okay, you might want to put your answer out in the chat, but I'll take one more person's answer. Let me just give me 1 second. Uh, okay, can you unmute Mayan Jha? I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong.
Yeah, Mayan, please.
Yes, sir. I have given my answer on the chat. I have written it is for betterment of people. We can tell you and show that it is checked by government and proved by government. And I will also show you by testing it on the disease which it cures and tell that it has no side effects till it is used above its limits.
Sir,
Very nice. Okay, I like that answer. One other answer that I like. Okay, so I'll take some more answers from you all very soon.
Can
Okay?
I give the answer?
Okay, sure. Let's take one more answer, one final answer, and then we can slowly get going. Yeah.
Okay. I will show a graph of
Mhm.
of one of the drugs that is unlabeled. They will
Mhm.
think that it is the product drug that is being sold, and it is a
Mhm.
real drug. Its effectiveness has been proved, but it is
Mhm.
not the product drug. And if they question it, we can say you should trust us. If you don't, then you can sue us. And then, just in case, we can also just show another graph in which we exaggerate all of the results, and
Mhm.
we actually and in that experiment we use volunteers with whom we gave an actual antidote and not the
Okay.
product drug.
Wonderful. I really like your answer. That is exactly what I have in mind also, right? I'm going to refine your answer slightly to make it slightly simpler. I know you've thought about a lot of things here in a very short time. It's very, very impressive. But I'm going to make it slightly simpler, and that's exactly the answer that I'm going to get to, right? And I think, can I also ask maybe Shraddha Venkateshwaran to unmute and explain their answer? You have a very interesting answer. Are you here, Shraddha?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yes,
Sorry, sir.
explain your answer.
So I sent basically I sent, I would say, first I tested it on a couple of rats with fever and they worked. Then I did it on humans and they still worked. These medicines
What do
are
you mean by
very
it worked on humans?
like they had fever and they got cured of it,
Okay,
just like the rats.
okay,
Then these medicines are very safe. We even showed our testing to the government and they approved it. We can even show you the certificate.
wonderful. I'm convinced. You should become a CEO of the company. I'm very convinced, right? Okay, so now let's slowly press forward. I will take some more questions towards the end, right? If you have some more questions, do hold your thought. I like the fact that you're all having questions, but I'll
Can I
take them towards the
tell
end.
one last thing?
Guys, we are not
Okay, let's take one last
accepting.
answer. Sure. Let's take one last answer and then we can slowly press on. Yeah.
So we can test whatever the ingredients are there in the drug, and we check it in the laboratory, and if it's safe we can use it on some animals first and then we can use it.
Wonderful, right? I really like that answer, right? All of you have amazing answers, right? All of you have amazing convincing skills. I'm very impressed, right? So,
Sir, can you go back to the last? We can just actually give him fake results of how the medicine
oh
works.
no, let's not do that. Yeah. We're going to be as realistic as possible, right? So there are a lot of people who are going to audit what we're doing, and we cannot produce anything fake. Let's just stay with that, right? So let's slowly press on now. Let's continue going forward, and I'll ask you some more questions in the end, right? So what a lot of you have pointed out is, in some sense, I have to to test a drug, I need to first try it on many people, right? So, but now this begs a question, right? So just because people having the drug has reduced fever in one day does not mean that there are some other external factors that have reduced the fever for them. What I mean by that is the following. So, this is just the example that I've given, right? So, right. So, the main point is this. So, let's say I have 100 people, right? And they find that on average they recover faster than those who don't take the drug, right? But the problem is the 100 patients that I gave the drug to could have been a very small young population. They could have been a very healthy population to start with, right? And or what if maybe worse, I avoided sick people in my population simply because I'm testing a new drug. That is something that is very scary to do, right? In some sense, I'm trying to find out if a drug is actually useful or not. And I'm restricting my test to only those people who are not very sick. That's a very scary thing to do. I wouldn't want to do that, right? So in some sense, we have to be very careful about how we're going to test my drug and convince me that this works, right? So this is sort of the idea that I propose, okay? So, so let's say these are all the patients that are there, right? So this is the set of all maybe like 200 patients, let's say. For I'm gonna for each patient, I'm gonna toss a coin or roll a die, whatever, right? By doing that, let's say I roll a die. If it comes out even, that is, if it's either 2 or a 4 or a 6, I'm gonna give them the drug. Okay? And if it comes out an odd number, maybe a 1 or a 3 or a 5, I'm going to give them something, just salt water or something instead of the drug. Okay? In other words, half the people I'm giving the actual drug. The other half of the people, I'm not giving them anything. I'm only giving them salt water or something like that to control, right? Or maybe I can give them a drug that is already being used in the market, right? For fever, maybe like Crocin or something. I'm just giving them some medicine that already exists in the market, right? So remember, my intervention here is the drug that I'm giving them. My comparison here is I'm giving them something else, like either a placebo. What is placebo is simply think of it as salt water, or maybe like a drug that already exists and so on, right? Remember, now there are like 100 people here. For these 100 people, let's say like for these people, the drug actually works and it reduces the fever reduces the fever in one day, right? And there are two people for which it still does not work in the treatment group, that is, in the group for which I've given the drug. Now, similarly, in the group for which I've given just salt water, um, obviously, I'm expecting very few people to have recovered in 1 or 2 days, right? So those without the heart means that they have not recovered, right? In one day, for instance, right? But it could still be by chance that two people have recovered in one day, even after receiving salt water, right? So this is something that I claim is going to convince me that this drug actually works, right? Why does this convince me? It convinces me because of this major randomization step that is going on here. In other words, I'm choosing a very large sample. In that very large sample, I'm randomly assigning each patient to whether or not they get the drug, right? And people who get the drug, I observe their outcome, how long it takes for their fever to reduce. People who don't get the drug, again, I go on, I observe and see how long it takes for their fever to reduce. And I compare the number of people here with the number of people here, right? In other words, if the number of people whose fever has reduced in one day in this group is much more than the number of people whose fever has reduced in one day in this group, then that is definitely going to convince me that my drug works, right? Okay. If you have any questions, put it out in the chat. Okay. I'm not going to ask you to unmute now, but if you have any questions, put it out in the chat and I will take them.
Sir, I have sent you.
You have sent me a question. Where?
Sir, mine on personal message.
On personal message. I'm not sure if I can see personal message. Do you mind putting your question again? Sorry.
Okay, sir.
Okay, I see your question. You have an objection in Shraddha's answer because if we can use it on humans, it can have side effects. As rats are totally different from us. Yes, I'll come back to this question in the very end. Okay, that's a very good question. Slightly different from what we are doing currently, but that's a very good question. I will come back to that question in the end. Right? Does anybody have any questions about what we are currently doing? All right. So I'm gonna assume that there
Sir,
are
I
not.
also sent in the chat directly to you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I will get to all these direct messages in the very end of the chat if that is fine, unless it is a question that is of current relevance. Okay. So hearts just mean that people have recovered, right, in one day, right? So in some sense, what is going on here? By randomizing, what I have done is, in some sense, I've controlled or I've taken care of other factors that can influence my effect of my drug on the outcome of interest, right? The sole purpose of randomizing is, in some sense, so there may be like many other factors that affect how patients are chosen whether they have to receive the drug or whether they have to receive salt water, right? By randomizing, what I'm essentially doing is I'm telling them that, okay, I don't care what any of your external factors are. I'm going to randomly assign you to whether you're going to receive a treatment or whether you're going to receive salt water, right? And if you happen to receive treatment, I'm going to look at how long it takes for you to recover. If you happen to receive salt water, I'm still going to look at how long you take to recover. And I'm going to compare the number of people who recovered fast here with the number of people who recovered fast here, right? If the number of people who recovered fast in the first scenario is much higher than the number of people who recovered faster in the second scenario, then I'm going to be convinced that my drug works, right? So this is sort of what is called a randomized controlled trials, right? In other words, what are we doing? We're randomizing who gets the drug and who doesn't. We're controlling for a lot of things using this idea of a randomization, and we're carrying out an experiment or a trial, right? So this idea of a randomized controlled trial is sort of the gold standard for what is going to convince me that a drug works or not, right? So most of the tests that are carried out in the current world before any drug is out for use in the market is through a randomized controlled trial. And like many of you pointed out, it starts on rats and pigs and so on, and guinea pigs in particular. It starts on rats and guinea pigs in particular. And then if it is safe, if it is responding the way it did in rats and guinea pigs, it's then slowly moved towards phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 and phase 4 trials. And only after 4 rounds of trials on initial volunteer humans, only after that is released to the public, right? In other words, see, what is the main point here? The key idea is that before releasing a medicine to the market, I have to be super careful that it does not have any unintended side effects, as one of you were pointing out, right? So I have to be extremely careful because in medicine in general, there is very little scope for error. I don't want to make mistakes if I'm releasing something that could potentially affect the entire world, right? So this idea of a test is something that's just been refined, and it's sort of the gold standard in how testing whether or not a new medicine work goes, right? So I see a couple of raised hands. Maybe like if the volunteers can help me unmute them one at a time, I'd really appreciate it.
Athar, Athar Shukla.
What about government tests?
Wait, what about
Those
what?
are more popular.
What about what? Sorry.
Government tests, like they tested in lab whether it is safe or it works.
Sure. I mean, even that needs people, right? Even if you're testing something in the government, you still need people to test things on.
Oh.
Right? I like your thought though, right? Okay, so Nishka has an interesting question on the chat. So the people who recovered are about 4 out of 6, let's say 4/6 of the people, 2/3 of the people have recovered. But 2 people will tell their friends and family that the test does not work, and they'll tell their friends and so on, all right? Because of this, 1/3 of the community will not use the medicine, which leads to a slight loss in their profit. I really like that thought. You're really thinking as a CEO of a company now, talking about all profits and everything. Wonderful. But so that's a very good thought, right? So one thing here is that you're not going to just carry out one single trial. You're going to carry out multiple trials in stages, as I told you, right? So that's going to take care of the drug not having worked on some people, right? Excellent thought, right? Okay, so can you help me unmute maybe one other person who's raised their hands?
Shraddha?
Yes, sir. So, sir, why do you have to randomize it? You can like just call volunteers or something.
Just call volunteers for what? So let's say
Like,
if let's say I'm conducting the experiment, for instance, are you asking me to ask you whether you want the drug or salt water?
yeah,
Okay, and okay, why do you think that's going to help?
I don't know. Some people might like, why do you need to randomize? What is the need of that?
That's an
That's my
excellent question.
question.
That's an excellent question, right? Think about it this way. So let's say I'm very, very, very sick, right? I've been having
Okay.
fever for maybe like 1 week or something.
Okay.
Do you think that I will be experimenting with a new drug, or do you think I will say that, okay, just give me salt water?
I think you would say just give me salt water.
Really? I
Yeah,
would
you
not do
wouldn't.
that.
You because is this a first test or like something like that?
Let's say, okay, sure. Let's say we're in the second round of trials and the first round of trials was promising.
Okay,
Would you
then
say, yeah,
you would join the drug thing.
excellent, right? So in
Yeah.
some sense, what is going on here? There is some sort of a bias that we're introducing, right? In some sense, if in my trial, I would kind of expect sick people to receive the drug and not very sick people to receive salt water if I give them a choice, correct?
Um, I actually don't think so.
Okay, why do you not think so?
Because like sick people, they have already tried many drugs, and
Okay,
so I've sent this in the chat, but I'll just read out what I said.
sure.
So like in the last last slide you showed us, there were two
Mm-hmm.
questions, right?
Sure,
So I read this kind of like in a book.
sure.
Yeah, that's one. The first one, what if the people who took the drug were younger, healthier, or more optimistic? So, I read this, like, studies have shown that if a person believes that the drug is working, then they can recover faster.
Yes.
Like, I forgot the name of this. But
Okay,
so,
okay.
if people don't believe it works, the results will be kind of worse.
Yes.
And suppose you advertise better and more people will believe this, then your sales will be higher.
Wonderful. Okay, I like that thought. Okay, so one quick answer to that is the purpose of randomization is essentially to control for all other factors that might or might not influence who gets the drug and who doesn't, right? So for instance, maybe let's
Mm-hmm.
say if you ask each person whether or not they want to get the drug, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then that's sort of going to bias my sample in a very interesting way. Because let's say people who are willing to experiment may be the ones who are younger, for instance, right? I would
Mm-hmm.
expect old people to be slightly more risk averse in the sense that they don't want to
Mm-hmm.
take many risks, right? So my population, my sample now, in some sense, is biased with very young people receiving the drug and very old people not receiving the drug, right? If
So,
you
so
give each of them a choice, right? I'll come back to your question, right? So my sample now is in some sense very like very biased. So the people who receive the drug are actually very, very young. And so I would, in some sense, there is reason to believe that this drug is going to work simply because these people are young. So, so what's going to happen? An unintended consequence of this is that my drug is going to be artificially really very good simply because the set of people who I tested this drug on are very young. I did not test the drug on old people simply because they didn't want to receive the drug. Right? So, in other words, what randomization attempts to do is to basically weed out or to rule out any other factors that could have affected my treatment assignment mechanism. In other words, all the main goal of randomization is to basically say that I don't care about I don't care about anything about you. I'm going to either give you the drug or not give you the drug with some probability. I'm going to roll a dice or I'm going to toss a coin. If it comes up head, I'm going to give you a drug. If it doesn't, I'm not going to give you a drug. All right.
So,
So yeah, let's take
so
one more question. Maybe we can come back on this thought slightly later. I just want to give some opportunity for some more people to ask questions,
okay,
but I'll also give you my email ID in the end and you can write to me if it
okay,
gets stuck. All right, awesome. Thank you so much for the question, though. I'll take
yeah.
one more question and then we can
Good.
slowly press. Yes. Does anybody have
So
one more question or we can slowly move on?
most is done in real life.
That's a very good question, right? So, in other way, okay, how is what done in real life? Let me ask you just to be slightly clear, let me ask you, how is what done in real life?
Like, how do they convince people to take this drug?
Oh, give them free food. I'm just kidding. So, so okay, that's a very good question. So maybe okay, so like maybe one story that I can tell you is the following. So I'm currently in this place called the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. So we are a big university in the east coast of the US, right? And it was just turning 8:15 a.m., which means I have to stop in 15 minutes. Right? Yeah, I have to stop in 15 minutes. So what we occasionally receive emails saying, "Oh, some of us have found a new drug that we think works, and we want volunteers for the study. And as a thank you for volunteering, we're going to give you food. We're going to give you some money as an incentive for volunteering." So people sign up for this on their own by volunteering, and there are also cases of maybe so like doctors have like a list of patients who have very severe symptoms, right? And this is something that is often shared with the rest of the rest of the medicine community, for instance. And to be able to test whether a specific drug works or not, you can look at patients who are suffering from this particular disease and um, test the effectiveness of the medicine on these set of patients, right? So we have a way to recruit patients into a study either on a volunteer, I mean, it's always on a voluntary basis, but the target audience may be either like university students, or it may be just the general common public, or people already with some disease and so on, right? That's an excellent question, though. I really like how you're thinking about this, right? So let's take, okay, so I will press on slightly more. I'll stop in maybe like 5-ish minutes and then open the floor for some more questions, right? So, okay, here is one small thought experiment, right? So so what am I trying to do? I'm trying to study whether or not a drug works for a patient or not, right? Imagine a place where I could clone a patient, right? In other words, I can make an exact copy of every patient in the study, right? And by making the exact copy of every patient in the study,
What
the
is the meaning of
objective
clone?
is think of clone as a Xerox copy of a human, right? I can't put a human in a Xerox machine, but think of it as an exact copy of a human, right? The same version of you, just another version of you, okay? Who's going to have the same characteristics, the same behavior, everything else is the same, okay? So, um, right. So imagine we are in a world where we could potentially clone a patient, right? So now, how do I test if a drug works or not? Remember, I have two versions of me, right? Let me call Anirudh A and Anirudh B, right? What I'll do is for Anirudh A, I'm gonna give the actual drug, right? The actual medicine that I invented. For Anirudh B, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna give only Anirudh B only salt water, right? And I'm gonna see if Anirudh A recovers faster than Anirudh B or not. And if Anirudh A recovers faster than Anirudh B, I'm going to be convinced that the drug actually might be working. I'm going to do this for every patient in my study, right? But what is the main problem with this? Put your answers in the chat and do not unmute, please. What is the main problem with this? There is a very, very stupid problem here. Yes, okay, a lot of you are sending private chats. Good. Right. So the main problem with this is I can't clone a patient, right? I cannot make a copy of myself, right? So that is the main problem with this. So what the idea of causal inference attempts to do is we are trying to, without having to clone the patient, we are trying to see if we can approach or we can approximate cloning a patient, right? That is sort of what the main idea of causal inference is, right? Without having the ability to make clones, it will be super interesting if we could make clones, but right. So one workaround this is to divide people into groups so that they're as similar as possible and test whether they and test the effectiveness of the drug on them, right? So for example, what I can do is recruit maybe 20 volunteers from all of you, right? So maybe like I can choose 20 out of how many ever are here, 45 people here, and maybe give all of you the drug when you get fever, right? And maybe like in my square roots, I'm giving a similar session in the square roots tomorrow. So for the square roots batch, I can choose 20 people and give them the salt water instead, right? And then I expect you both are going to be of similar ages and a lot of things are going to be very similar, right? In other words, the two target populations that I have in mind, that is the cube roots batch and the square root batch, are really very similar, right? And then I'm going to see if the drug had any better effect on the cube roots batch as opposed to the square roots batch. If a lot of you are recovering faster, then I'm going to be convinced that my drug actually works, right? So a trick that is used to in the world where we don't have the ability to clone a patient is to basically make treatment groups that are very, very similar in characteristics, and then we are going to do some sort of a drug trial on them. And this is one approach that is taken, right? So let's come back to, obviously there are some issues with this, right? That's one of the main things that I want to point out. And this is in line with some of the questions, some of the answers that you were putting out in the chat. This is not the best, I mean, this is kind of the best procedure in existence, but there are still many, many issues with this, right? I cannot always randomize, right? So for example, what if instead of maybe studying the effect of a drug on fever recovery, what if I'm testing the effect of smoking on cancer? Or what if I'm testing the effect of whether or not seatbelts save lives in an accident, right? In that case, what randomization asks me to do is it asks me to randomize, or it asks me to assign people to smoke, or it asks me to assign people to not wear seatbelts. That is something that is ethically and morally wrong, right? I cannot force you to not wear a seatbelt. I cannot force you to smoke, right? That is one of the main issues with randomized control trials, right? So there's going to be a lot of ethical and moral issues that come up in randomly assigning samples, right? So what we end up having data of is more often observational data. In other words, for instance, if I'm trying to study the effect of, let's say, seat belts on accidents, right? So let's say I'm trying to answer the question of whether seat belts actually save you during a major accident or not. Obviously, when I'm trying to design a trial for this, I cannot randomly assign people to not wear seat belts, but I'm going to have some historical data of uh, accidents in which people have worn and not worn seat belts, right? And I'm trying to see whether this effect of seat belts on death in an accident can be recovered from this data or not. the main workhorse that we used, the main tool that we used was randomization. And now I don't have randomization anymore, right? And so this leads us into a world of something called observational studies, which is away from randomized controlled trials, but is still super useful in the real world, right? So in the last 2 minutes, I'm going to convince you how useful these things actually are, right? So I'm going to give you a lot of real world examples where things like these are actually used, and we'll take it from there, right? So for example, in the medicine world, I can talk about whether taking aspirin reduces heart attacks or not. Right, that's one thing that as pharmacologists or as doctors, that's something that we would definitely be interested in, right? And maybe do vaccines reduce infection or mortality rates? That's another question in medicine that I would be interested in, right? And maybe like if you put yourself in maybe the shoes of a policymaker, then should I impose a mandatory seatbelt and helmet law? Right? In other words, if it has been shown that seatbelts do reduce deaths in accidents, then it makes sense for me to make wearing a seatbelt mandatory, right? Make wearing a helmet in a two-wheeler mandatory, right? And maybe another question in the realm of education and public policy is maybe asking questions like if having a small class size actually improves test scores or not, right? And maybe another question is if I electrify, so there are a lot of villages in India that don't have a lot of electricity. If I electrify, if I give these villages electricity, is it actually going to cause some economic development? In other words, is it really helping? Is giving them just electricity actually helping? Are there other things that can help them? And how much is giving them electricity actually helping stuff, right? And maybe like something that's slightly more varied in context is using social media causing anxiety or depression or like low test scores or something, right? I want to be able to study how things like this work. And maybe something like do environmental regulations about maybe like the odd even rule in Delhi, or maybe like some control on when you're allowed to burst crackers for Diwali and so on. Is that do these regulations, does that actually help in reducing the pollution without hurting anything, right? It might have some unintended consequences. Without any unintended consequences, does it actually reduce pollution, right? And maybe one idea that has been playing that's been played around of late is maybe if I can impose a very high tax on sugar and junk food, then is that going to be a good enough incentive for the world to start eating healthy? Is that going to reduce obesity, right? So of course, so this, I mean, any intervention that you take has a lot of unintended consequences, right? Because for example, if I just decide to impose taxes on sugar, all the sugar manufacturers are going to be extremely angry at me because I've made their product more expensive and thereby reducing the demand, right? So I have to be very careful about what the unintended consequences are before carrying out any major policy decision like this. I really have to think about all the other unintended consequences that this might have. And if I'm convinced that the effect that this has is really very useful, only then should I consider bringing about a change like this, right? And like I pointed out many times before, in many cases, we're not just interested in if imposing taxes on sugar is going to reduce obesity. But from a practical implementation perspective, I'm going to be more worried about how much is the effect actually. That is, if I increase the tax rate by maybe like 3% on sugar, by how much am I expecting the obesity rate to come down by? Right? So these are sort of some of the questions that this world of causal inference attempts to answer. Right. And I mean, I did not make this extremely technical because this is an introductory talk to this. But I can tell you that this is something that is very relevant to this current world. Right. So in fact, so I'm a PhD student. I'm a second year PhD student here in the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And my research work essentially focuses on this in slightly more complicated settings, right? So with this, I think I'll slowly stop my talk here and I'll open the floor to just a couple of minutes. So again, if the volunteers can help me unmute people who have some questions.
Ashwath?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You're raising your hand. What's your question? Okay, he was
Sir,
not.
I raised it for before question, sir. I forgot to put it down.
Okay, no worries.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine. Joshua?
Sir, I have a doubt. When they're testing the drug, does the natural health of the patient matter?
What do you mean?
The natural immunity of the person.
Yes,
Sir,
it
could you show the
does.
screen?
Yes, it does. And the reason why it, okay, so the way it matters is, okay, it matters and does not matter. And that is what the idea of randomization attempts to take care of, right? By randomizing the treatment choice, whether I give salt water or whether I give the actual drug, by randomizing things, I'm saying that I don't care about what the actual health status of the patient was, but I'm going to give them drug or I'm going to give them salt water simply because they are in the study and my coin toss came up to be a head. All right, that's a very good question, right?
Sir,
Any other questions? Yeah.
sir, so actually, what if for one person you made a drug and it was unsuccessful?
Mhm.
Actually, you don't test it. You directly tested it on Uniplex and all those. It turned successful. But when you tested it on humans, some people died because of that drug. What will you do it? It might be a coincidence, but how are you going to convince people that it is a coincidence or not because of the medicine?
That's a very good question, right? In other words, okay, so if I can summarize your question in a different way, my drug still might not work on everybody,
Yes.
right? So the way things work here is that if it works for the majority of the people, I'm going to look at is there anything that I can identify about the set of people that it has worked on? So, for example, has it only worked on 15-year-old men or 15-year-old boys who are, I don't know, thin and tall? Has it only worked on a very specific set of people? If so, I'm going to implement my drug only for this small subset of
Sir,
the
could you show
people
the last
until I
screen?
have some more evidence. Right? So there are
Sir, could you
strategies
show
like
the
this
last
that
screen?
are, wait, sorry.
Sir, you're echoing, sir. Sir, could you show the last screen, sir?
Okay, I am not sure how I can help with the echo because I'm just signed in from one device. I think it's because people are unmuted. But if you could, if maybe somebody could unmute everybody, that's gonna help. And here is my last screen.
Okay, I muted everybody. Aniruddhan sir, can you just unmute yourself once?
Oh, sure. Thanks. Yeah. Okay, so I'll leave it to the volunteers to decide if we have time for one more question or we can call it a day. And I'll put out my email ID in the chat. And maybe if you can just pause chat for just 1 quick minute after I've typed out my email ID, just so that it's not um, left in the chat. So this is my email ID. So if the volunteers can just stop chats for just 1 quick minute until people note down their email IDs, that's going to be convenient. Okay, so if you have any more questions or if you want to discuss something like this, send me an email. I'll be happy to talk. And yeah, so with this, I can formally call it a close to the session. Thank you so much for coming on. What is it, a Saturday evening? Wow. Okay, that is very impressive.
Yeah. Okay, Yash?
Yes. So, hello everyone. My name is Yash, a volunteer in the Cube Roots camp. Firstly, I thank RAM Foundation for organizing this session and the introduction to research and statistics. Next, I would like to thank Aniruddhan sir for a very interesting talk on this topic of statistics. I truly loved the weird example which sir gave in the beginning of the session. It made us think quite a lot on what could be the reason for this question. I also learned the real life uses of this field in research. And I also learned how to think like a true CEO and convince people to take my drug. And I also thank the volunteers for helping with the session. and the students for actively participating in this session. One special thing about this lecture were the theories of the students. I truly loved reading your thoughts, and your imaginations were exam nice. Thank you for listening to my vote of thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Yash. That was really
All
nice. And yeah,
right.
thank you so much for staying also.
We'll formally end this meeting. Those who don't have questions can leave, and those who have questions can stay back to just ask him for 5 minutes or so.
Sir, do you have 5 minutes?
Yes, sure.